Tonight, Venerable Children is traveling in Indonesia. I think she's in Jambi, the place where Lama Tisha spent some time with his teacher, Sir Lingpa. So tonight we're going to be engaging in a review. We're going back to talk about internal form and maybe consciousness. And so let's start by setting our motivation. I was recalling earlier today that when I lived in Australia, I met a woman from Bhutan. And in our first conversation, she shared with me, she said, I live my life according to the Four Noble Truths. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I thought, well, I do too. And then as I got to know this woman over a number of weeks and months, I was humbled when I observed that she seemed to have a deeper understanding of these Four Noble Truths. And they seemed to inform how she lived her life. She had a kind of radiance about her and a certainty in the way she went about her actions and a real focus on the purpose of her life. And so it has been a good reminder for me when I remember it to think about how different my life would be if I had stronger familiarity and stronger ascertainment of these Four Noble Truths that the Buddha taught. And so I imagine all of us in this room have a correct assumption about the Four Noble Truths. We've heard teachings on them many times. But let's just imagine for a few moments, what if we had very, very strong familiarity, incredibly strong familiarity, not just a correct assumption, but had a reliable cognition of the truth of suffering. Just imagine how that would change, how that would inform and influence your daily actions of body, speech, and mind. What would be different? And so when we reflect in this way, we come to know the benefits of deeper and deeper familiarity with the truth of suffering or the truth of dukkha, the truth of dissatisfaction. And so just reflect for a moment, what would it take to actualize that deeper understanding? What would it require? In a similar way, we could imagine doing this with the truth of origin and the truth of cessation and the truth of path. And so I just offer this as a possible reflection in our daily lives to really take these beautiful teachings from the Buddha very seriously. Not just leaving them at an intellectual understanding, not just leaving them at a superficial correct assumption, but really working with them on a daily basis so that we ground them in our own experience. And so that our actions of body, speech, and mind reflect our understanding. At least we can make that aspiration. And so tonight, as we continue reviewing the Course in Buddhist Reasoning and Debate, then let's remember that we're doing this study so that we can improve our minds and our understanding of how things exist and how our mind works, so that we can actualize these Four Noble Truths, so that we can be of greatest benefit to all living beings. As far as I can tell, the last proper review ended with external matter. And so we're on page 186 in the hard copy, or the section called Internal Matter, if you have a Kindle version or an ebook. So tonight we'll pick up with internal matter. And so as we usually do when we talk about debate or begin debating, we place ourselves for the study of internal matter by placing ourselves in the outline of all that is selfless, by going through some general debate. And we can kind of speed through that process just by asking yes or no questions, I think. So the selfless is divided into existence and non-existence. What would you say to that statement? Good. And existence are divided into functioning thing and permanent phenomena. And the divisions of functioning things, they can't be posited. Thank you. The divisions of functioning thing can be posited. Please posit them, Venerable Chuni.
Functioning things can be divided into three types: form, consciousness, and abstract composites.
You got it. Okay. But the definition of matter can't be posited. Oh, so it follows the definition of matter can be posited.
Yes.
Please posit that definition.
Matter is defined as that which is atomically established.
So it follows the subject, that which can be atomically established is the definition of matter.
I accept.
Good. When you divide matter, how many divisions are there? Does it feel like you're pulling out of some deep, dark past? We haven't done this kind of review in a while.
2.
2. What are they?
External.
These 2 can't be posited individually.
Why?
Oh, it follows they can be posited individually.
Yes.
Posit them, please.
The 2 divisions of matter are external and internal. So external matter is that which is atomically established.
I didn't ask for that.
Oh. It's jumping ahead.
Yeah, this is part of the challenge of debate, is just to give the answer that's been asked for. Not to give more, not to give less. Just what's asked for. Okay, so it follows the subject, external matter and internal matter are the divisions of matter. Okay, good. Okay, so I'll bet the definition of internal form can't be posited. Well, internal form and internal matter are, form and matter are mutually inclusive, aren't they? And so in our text, the broad category was given as matter, and then the other divisions were, well, internal matter. Yeah, we can say internal matter. Okay, the definition of internal matter can't be posited. What follows the definition can be posited. Posit that definition, please.
The definition of internal matter is that which is atomically established within the continuum of a person.
So So it follows that the subject, that which is atomically established and is included within the continuum of a person, is the definition of internal matter.
I accept.
Good. Okay. So now we're up to internal matter, aren't we? That didn't take too long. Okay. So just a very brief review. Internal matter are the basis of a person's feelings of physical pleasure and pain. Isn't that interesting? These should be of great interest to us. They're the basis for our feelings of physical pleasure and pain. In addition, the fleshy material body within a person's continuum, like skin and organs, are internal matter, right? We can include things like the nails and the hair beyond where they may be. We won't include the nail and hairs beyond where they can be felt. So technically, the fleshy material body within a person's continuum is considered both internal and external matter, isn't it? Because it can be internal matter in my continuum, but it can be external matter to someone looking at my body, at least the parts they can see. Seems like we came up with some parts of the body that didn't have nerve endings. Do any of you remember that? And can you state what they are? Are there parts of the body?
There's no nerve endings in the sclera or the white part of the eye.
Okay.
The brain.
The brain does not have nerve endings.
You know, they do, when they do surgery on people's brains, they're wide awake so that they can report. They ask them to speak and sing and do all these things so that they make sure they're not damaging those parts of the brain.
Okay.
That's all I can think of.
All right. That's two good examples right there. Okay. So this is not an airtight or watertight definition or a description. But here in collected topics, the division of matter into external and internal form mainly refers to the five sense faculties. Sometimes they're called the five sense powers, but we're preferring the term faculties that correspond to the five sense consciousnesses. So you may remember that sense faculties are subtle, clear matter and not visible to an ordinary being's senses, therefore only internal matter. And these sense faculties give their consciousnesses dominance or governance with respect to certain objects. So, for instance, the eye sense faculty gives dominance to the visual consciousness for shapes and colors and things like that. But it's interesting to keep in mind that a Buddha's consciousness is cross-functional. His eyes can not only see, or his eye consciousness, I guess, would say. His eye consciousness also hears and smells and tastes and has exalted knowers of reality and diversity. So I did hear a story once about an old lama who lost his eyesight, but he was able to read by running his finger along the text. So seems to stand to reason that he may have been enlightened. I don't know. So how do the two compare, external form and internal form? Mutually exclusive? 4P? Okay. Who'd like to give some examples of each one and explain why it is and is not external form and internal form? General Nima, you up for that? No? Okay. Sorry. Didn't mean to put you on the spot. Group process. Okay. What's something that's both? External matter and internal matter. Okay. The subject, my body. Okay. You want to tell us why they're both?
Yes, the subject, your body, is external form because from my point of view, it's an external form. It's an object of visual consciousness. The subject, your body, is an internal form because from your point of view, it's your own body. So it's internal to you.
It meets the definition
It meets the
internal
definition of
matter?
internal form. Thank you.
Okay. All right. What's something that is external matter but not internal matter?
Something that is external matter but not internal matter is the sun or the moon.
The sun or the moon. You've been reading the text. Okay. And tell us why it is external matter and not internal matter.
It is not internal matter because it's not within the continuum of a person.
Mm-hmm.
And it's external matter because it is atomically established and it's not within the continuum of a person.
Uh-huh. Okay. And then what's something that is internal matter but not external matter?
The I sense power.
Right. The subject, the I sense power. And tell us why it is internal matter but not external matter.
It's internal matter because it's included within the continuum of a person. I can't. I don't know.
So it follows that consciousness is internal matter because it's included within the continuum of a person. That's a unwanted consequence. Okay, so you had half of the definition there, and always the definition is going to be a good reason. So we could say that the I sense faculty or power is internal matter because it is atomically established. That excludes it from being consciousness or abstract phenomena, and it's included within the continuum of person. So that would be airtight. Okay, and then the I sense faculty is not external matter because
It's not external matter because it's a clear internal form that's the uncommon empowering condition. That and
That's
for its
true.
own effect and eye consciousness.
That's true. What was the last part?
For its own effect and eye consciousness.
Okay, so that is the definition, and often the definition is the best reason we can give. But another thing we could say is that the I sense faculty is not seen by an ordinary being's sense consciousnesses. Therefore, it's only internal matter. Okay, so either one of those would probably work.
You know, where he says in here that something can be both internal and external matter. His reason for saying it's external matter doesn't quite jive, because the definition of external matter is that which is externally established and is not in the continuum of a person.
Is atomically
Or
established.
that which is atomically established, but is not in the continuum of a person. So that should make them mutually exclusive by those definitions. And he's saying his reason he gives is because it can be seen by the eye consciousness. It can be a object of visual. Let's see.
It's internal form because of being a material phenomena included within the continuum of person, and it's external form because of being matter that is an object of others' sense consciousnesses.
That's not the definition of external matter that he gives, and it doesn't really even match it.
I suspect he's brought this up because it's a bit of a contradictory situation, isn't it? Okay, so he's brought up a really good point. And as I said earlier, internal matter and external matter, or internal matter, especially in the context of collected topics, mainly refers to sense faculties. So mainly refers, it doesn't eliminate that it could include other things, but when we're talking about these things, mainly it refers to them. So I think he's left himself an out, but I appreciate that you caught that. Yeah.
He gives for a reference in oral transmissions.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was reading debate, I remember there was a lot of discussion about this idea, and different schools hold different positions. So. Okay, so if we go back and we think about what is the definition of external matter, so we're going to go back and explain what he's talking about. The definition it was giving for external matter is that which is atomically established and is not included within the continuum of a person. All right, so the example that was given for something that is both external and internal matter would be something like my physical body. because it's internal matter for me and it's external matter for someone else's consciousness. But if we use that as a definition, it doesn't really fit with the definition that's given in the text, which is something that's atomically established, but is not included within the continuum of a person. This body is included within the continuum of a person. I can vouch for that. So, on one hand, if we were to stick just with the definitions, we could make the case that they are mutually exclusive. But if we go beyond just what's mainly described as internal matter, then it would be 4 possibilities. So I imagine this is answered different ways for different schools. It's a debate. Hey, we have a good debate. Thank you for bringing up a good debate. Okay. What about something that's neither? Neither internal matter nor external matter. Venerable Lamsel.
Your consciousness.
And why is that the case?
Because it's not atomically established.
For either of them. Good. Okay. So as we move through this section of the text on page 187, Dr. Badu reminds us of the 3 causes for a new visual consciousness. 3 things must come together for any new consciousness, particularly here we're talking about a new visual consciousness. So there needs to be an external visible object, a sense faculty, and a previous moment of I consciousness. Interesting that he said a previous moment of I consciousness. He didn't say any consciousness, but I have a feeling that you could say any consciousness. I think the reason that I consciousness is given in situations like this is because the I consciousness is actually the substantial cause of the new moment of I consciousness. You have to have a previous moment of I consciousness to have a new moment of I consciousness. But does that necessarily mean that the I consciousness is necessarily the immediately preceding condition? Probably not. This was the point that Venerable Chodron was making. So that's a kind of a general way of describing these conditions that are necessary for a new moment of consciousness. Maybe a more technical way of talking about them is we have an observed object condition, the forms themselves like color and shape or sound or odors. And the consciousness is produced by the form casting its aspect towards the consciousness. I don't really know what that means, but that phrase is used a lot, that objects cast their aspects towards their consciousness. Okay, so that's an observed object condition. Then the sense faculty. What's the more technical name for that? Do you remember?
Empowering condition.
The uncommon empowering condition. Right, thank you. Sometimes it's translated as the uncommon governing condition, or the uncommon dominant condition. So there are different ways of translating that. But it's what gives the sense consciousness its particular ability to know a particular type of object. Okay, and then the last one, a previous moment of consciousness. In this case, I consciousness is the example. And that's the immediately preceding condition. So we have these 3 conditions. And keep in mind that a condition is necessarily a cause, if we're talking generally. A condition is a cause is a condition. So these are causes for the new moment of I consciousness. So the 3 causes of a visual perception are the eye sense faculty, the external visible object, and the former moment of I consciousness. Right. The eye sense consciousness, empowered by the eye sense faculty and observing an external object, color or shape, is generated in the aspect of that object, and an eye consciousness apprehending the object is produced. That's how it works. It's interesting that in his book, Debate, Dan Perdue includes this statement in that section. He says, within Buddhism there is a great emphasis on the study and training of consciousness. Buddhism presents a view of self-creation, that one's own actions create one's life situations. In this light, it has been said that Buddhism is not a religion, but a science of the mind. Actually, that he's quoting His Holiness there. This emphasis on the mind comes from knowing that although one can train the body extensively, eventually physical skills will only decline. On the other hand, if one trains the mind well, one's advancement will not be lost. So I think he included that in that section. I'm just guessing, but he included that to remind us that we're talking about the mind and the different aspects of the mind, how the mind functions, because we're wanting to train our minds to the point that we have these uncontrived or spontaneous experiences of positive qualities, positive states of mind, like compassion or loving kindness. Must be in a text somewhere, because I remember Geshe Tashi Sering used to use the example all the time of a long jumper. A long jumper can train for a long time and really build up their skill to be able to jump a long distance. But if they stop training, they will lose that capacity. Kind of like, sounds like aging, doesn't it? You start losing capacity. But the distinction, one of the qualities of the mind that's so amazing, is that we can develop states of mind or qualities, positive qualities, to the point that they're just there all the time. This is what Buddhists have done. So I think he's giving us a little bit of encouragement for studying this material.
So about the eye consciousness needing an immediately preceding moment of eye consciousness, what about when the baby is developing in the womb and there's no eye consciousness? How does that come about?
There's a seed of eye consciousness that goes from life to life. Also, like when we go to sleep at night, there's no active eye consciousness, but the eye consciousness dissolves into a seed form and then is ready to come back the next day when we open our eyes. Yeah. So in general, we could say eye consciousness, but there are other consciousnesses we could assert, or even like you're bringing up the point that, the consciousness can dissolve into a seed form while we're sleeping or in between lives as well. Okay, so I'll bet the definition of eye consciousness can't be posited. Am I right? Come on, somebody must have reviewed these. Okay, good. So it follows it can be posited.
Except,
Okay, posit that definition.
not from my mind, but from the book.
Okay.
An eye consciousness is a knower that is produced in dependence on its own uncommon, empowering condition.
I'm sorry, I may have said eye consciousness, but I was actually thinking I sense power.
I see. Okay.
Sorry, I apologize. I sense power.
I
Can
wondered
turn the
why it's so
page.
easy.
Oh, okay. All right, if that one's so easy, please give that definition.
Just to finish it. Okay. The eye sense power and an observed object condition, a visible form.
That's not quite the definition.
Oh,
The eye
I
sense power.
finished. A knower that is produced in dependence on its uncommon, empowering condition, the eye sense power.
Look on page 187. Middle
So
of the
I
page.
just wanted to finish the eye consciousness.
Okay, good. We'll
So
come back to
not
we'll come back to you in a little while, because we're going to talk about the definition of consciousnesses. Good, thank you. No, I mean, you can go ahead and give the definition of eye sense faculty as well. So on page 187, I'm not letting her off the hook. She's been studying, I know. So 187, right in the middle. 187, right in the middle.
Eye sense power is a clear internal form that is the uncommon and empowering condition for its own affect and eye consciousness.
Good. So it follows the subject and a clear internal form that is the uncommon empowering condition for its own effect. The eye consciousness is the definition of eye sense faculty. Good. I'm glad. Okay. There are these Tibetan illustrations for each of the sense faculties. I don't know what a zarma flower looks like. Do any of you, or Zalmar flower? Yeah. Have you seen one? No? Okay. It looks a lot like the eye sense faculty. Yeah. Okay. So in the Tibetan text, they talk about, so someone who had clairvoyant powers must have described this to someone so that it was written down in a text. I don't know who it was, but the eye sense faculty is described to be like a zarma flower. Perhaps that's equivalent to the rods and cones in modern day understanding of how the eye works, the subtle internal workings of the eye. The ear sense faculty is a clear internal form having the shape of cut wheat. I looked at a picture of an ear. I didn't see anything that looked like the shape of cut wheat. You have an idea? The three tiniest bones, you think? Stirrup. And the anvil, the stirrup, and the, what was the hammer? Those look like cut wheat, you think? It's a good guess. Okay. Your guess is as good as any. All right. And then the nose sense faculty is a clear internal form shaped like two copper needles. Now that's interesting to think about. Maybe the olfactory receptors in the nose and actually the back of the throat, not just the nose, that bind these things that bind with specific odor molecules. Maybe those look like long, thin phenomena of some kind. I don't know. Then the taste sense faculty is a clear internal form shaped like a cut half moon. So you might think, taste buds. But actually, if you look up taste consciousness or gustatory. Anyway, the taste buds, the taste sense faculty, the small bumps on our tongue are not taste buds. They are papilla that contain taste buds. So you can't actually see the taste sense faculty. It's underneath the skin of the tongue. I mean, we could make that case since these are considered things that are only known by clairvoyant consciousness. Oh, that's for the tongue. Then tactile sense faculty. I made a typo here. Tactile sense faculty is the clear internal form shaped like smooth skin. Well, that's convenient. Perhaps the pathway of nerve receptors in the skin is what they were referring to, being the tactile sense faculty. Okay. Yes.
Something I found interesting, and I didn't ask questions about this, so this is sort of a vague understanding, but it seemed from Geshe Wangmo's point of view that the Geshis who are now studying science are thinking that things like nerve endings are part of that sense faculty. So they're kind of incorporating that sort of
wonderful
thinking.
Interesting, yeah. Okay. So these 5 internal sense faculties or forms, internal forms, in combination with the 5 external forms, are necessary to give rise to the 5 sense consciousnesses. These 5 sense faculties and consciousness are always stated in the same order. Do you remember that section of the text? So what's the order? What is it? EENTB. Okay, what are they? From the top down? Yeah, that's one way to think about them. So eye, ear, nose, taste, or tongue, and tactile consciousness. There were 3 different reasons for this order. One was the range of, the physical placement of the senses. That's one that you mentioned. Can you remember the other 2? Reliability was one. Range of perception. So our eye sense faculty can probably see the farthest, or know an object at the farthest distance. And then next would be hearing, and then smell, and then taste is right. You have to be there to taste something, and touch as well. Okay, and then I added a 3rd one, and that was that it always struck me as interesting that this is the order in which the sense consciousnesses dissolve at the time of death, at least how it's described in the 8 dissolutions. So, well, I'm just suggesting it. It's not in the book.
I was thinking of a 5th one in the way that I think we tend to let our visual consciousness dominate in a lot of ways. When we talk about perceiving things, we say we see something, even if we're
thinking about it.
Even if we're thinking about it, we say, I see it.
I see your point.
I see your point, or,
Yeah.
Just I think there's some order there, even though tactile should be number one. It seems like, well, oftentimes we're looking at something or listening to something, and we're not even paying attention to feeling our body touching the chair or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered about some kind of a priority that we give in that
Cascading
way.
of dominance. Interesting.
I would say from my own experience that I'm actually more audially dominant than visually dominant. So now, if I'm operating through the world, I'm not listening where my feet are going. It's true. But in terms of what I really notice and pay attention to and what sticks in my memory, I'm far more audio oriented. So I don't know about the dominance thing.
You say smell is really connected to
Yeah, so there's a lot to think about there. Okay. So then he goes on to talk about how, in general, matter is divided into these 10 types. There are 5 external forms or matters. So there's visible form, sound, odors or smells, taste, tactile objects. And then there's the 5 internal types of form or matter. Eye sense faculty, ear sense, nose sense, taste, tactile sense faculties. And then there's an 11th one that is sometimes included, non-revelatory form, or also known as form for a mental consciousness. And I just think these are very interesting to think about. Forms for a mental consciousness, are they really forms? We'd have to think about that. So there's 5 different types, and I think they're interesting. Form arising from aggregation. We talk about these single particles, single particles can't appear to our eye consciousness. Like for our eye consciousness to know a shape or a color, there have to be a series of moments of mind, and from this school's point of view, there have to be like an agglomeration of lots of particles for it to be able to appear to our eye conscious or visual consciousness. That's getting into particle theory. Maybe that's what we'll say about that one. Then there's space form, and that's the appearance of clear space only to a mental consciousness. And neither Jeffrey Hopkins' Meditation on Emptiness or any other text I found said anything more than that, so I don't really know much about that one. There's form arising from a promise. This is the one that we know most about, like when we take a vow, whether it's the one-day vow, the 8 Mahayana precepts, or our monastic vows that we take for life, or the Bodhisattva vows we take for not only this life. Well, yeah, they say we have the vow until we achieve enlightenment, but we have to renew it in life after life. So that's a form arising from a promise. And it was interesting. It was described that it takes on the shape of our body, like when we're crouching down to take the vow, that the vow takes that form. I imagine it stretches and moves when we do, but it was just an interesting description.
I heard the explanation that realized beings could perceive this subtle energy in the body of the person who took any kind of vows or precepts, and if they damaged and such.
Interesting, yeah. I don't doubt it. I had an experience one time. This is True Confessions. I was taking classes at the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, and I'd been out carousing the night before. And when I went to class the next morning, Geshe Sonam Rinchen looked at me like this, and I thought, oh, no, I'm in front of somebody who sees. Yeah, I did a lot of purification that day. That was interesting. There are people who can see.
Yeah, like many Tibetans, they're afraid of lamas because they think they know. I mean, they know that they could see their faults and misdeeds and whatever. Their mind.
Right. We were talking about this in comportment class the other day, and I brought up the example that I don't know where it comes from, but I've heard it many times, and that is that You know, really our lamas are described like doctors, and it would be ridiculous if we made the effort to go to the doctor and then we just sat there like, I'm fine, nothing wrong with me. No, I'm not going to show you any of my body parts. You know, it totally, what would you say? It defeats the purpose of going to see the doctor. Stupidagio. Yeah, as Venerable would say. Yeah. That's a good English, well, it's an Italian word, isn't it? And so if we can cultivate that kind of awareness, then we actually want our teachers to see us, because then they can help us. If we go around pretending or, developing pretension that we have qualities we don't, or what's the other one? Concealment, concealing the faults that we have, they are going to have less ability to help us. So it really is to our benefit to develop this state of mind, or this aspiration, this state of mind of wishing to be completely honest with our teachers, 100%. Then it really brings a sense of relief to the mind. You're not hiding anything. If we're hiding something from our teachers, then they can probably sense that. If they can't see it directly, they can probably sense it if they're ordinary beings. So, that's a little bit of insight. Okay, and then the last one is form for one with meditative power. And so this is like the earth or water appearing to one in isolated meditative stabilization on earth or water. I wonder if that's the meditations where someone is just meditating on the earth element, or just meditating on the water element. I'm not sure. I didn't pursue that any further. The kasinas, Venerable talked about the different kasinas where you're meditating on an earth kasina, for instance. It's a certain color. Yeah. Okay, so we went over the definition of eye sense faculty. So let's just go through the rest of them. Okay, so just to review, the eye sense faculty is the clear internal form that is the uncommon. It is actually the uncommon empowering condition for its own effect, the visual consciousness. Okay, so what about ear sense faculty? If you can do it without looking at the text, that's better, or best, or but preferable. But if you can't, that's all right too. What about ear sense faculty? What's the definition? Okay, look at your text. Clear internal form. Go ahead.
Real internal form that is the uncommon empowering condition to its own effect, an auditory consciousness.
Right. That's the definition of ear sense faculty. You just didn't want to show off, right? Venerable Amsal, what's the nose sense faculty definition?
The clear internal form that is uncommon empowering condition for its own effect, the olfactory sense consciousness.
Good. Okay. Christina, you got the next one? Tongue sense faculty.
A clear internal form that is the uncommon empowering condition for its own sense consciousness.
Its own effect.
Its own effect, the gustatory consciousness.
There you go. Good. Okay, and the last one, body sense faculty or tactile sense faculty? Yeah. Venerable Simke.
A clear form that is its uncommon empowering condition of its own effective body consciousness.
Yeah,
or tactile consciousness.
Yeah, good. Okay, so Venerable tends to prefer these terms for consciousness, visual consciousness instead of eye consciousness, visual consciousness, auditory consciousness, olfactory consciousness, gustatory consciousness, and tactile consciousness. Okay, so we'll keep those in mind. Okay, so that's a mouthful, isn't it? The clear internal form that it is its own uncommon empowering condition for its, that is the uncommon empowering condition for its own effect, and then state whatever sense consciousness it is. Okay. You just have to say it probably 20 or 30 times. So please do. So that you really keep it with you. That's the point. Yeah.
I think for me, and I think Virtue Summer said that too, if you take the definition apart and really try to understand for its own uncommon empowerment condition, what does it really mean?
Mm-hmm.
So of its own effect, Well,
All right, so let's talk about the definition a little bit, see if we can understand it. Okay. Let's look at ear sense faculty. A clear internal form. Okay, so we know its form, its internal form, and it's clear. So that's saying probably it's going to be difficult to see with an ordinary sense faculty or an eye sense faculty. So a clear internal form that is the uncommon empowering condition. So these sense faculties, they are, another name for them is uncommon empowering faculty for a particular consciousness. It's what gives that consciousness its dominance. It's what allows the eye consciousness to see visual forms, for instance. Instead of the eye consciousness can't hear sounds. It's specific for it. It empowers the visual consciousness to know shapes and colors. So does that help a little bit? So uncommon empowering condition. Why is it uncommon? Because it's only for its consciousness, its effect. It's giving rise to a new moment of eye consciousness, right? Or it's one of the conditions. So its effect is a new moment of visual consciousness. And that's the uncommon empowering condition. What would be a common empowering condition for a new moment of visual consciousness? Yeah, I think you can say any other cause, any other condition would be, it would empower the consciousness to know a visual object. Yeah. Okay, so a clear internal form that is the uncommon empowering condition for its specific effect. That's why it's uncommon. And then you state the specific consciousness that it's attached to. It's clear probably because it's not seen by an ordinary person's sense consciousnesses. It's only known by clairvoyance. That's my guess. Is that okay? That's my guess. You can look yourself and see if you find something else and bring it in. Okay, thanks. That was a good way to do it. And then each word of the definition has some meaning for us. Yeah, so a clear internal form, that is the uncommon empowering condition for its effect, the sense consciousness, the specific sense consciousness. Okay. So here we're talking about two of the three conditions that are necessary for a new moment of eye consciousness, aren't we? We're talking about the uncommon empowering condition, which is the sense faculty. We're talking about, we're talking about the resultant consciousness. We're not actually talking about the immediately preceding condition. So we'll come back to that. Okay, then on page 189, the second division of functioning thing is consciousness. So consciousness is the heading for those of you with ebooks. All Buddhists hold that consciousness exists as a separate entity from the body or from matter. Consciousness is described as a continuum that is the repository for our karmic seeds and imprints and goes from life to life. So this is quite different from the scientific assertions that mind is an emergent property of the body. I had to look this up to see what does that mean to be an emergent property. Well, okay, so the little bit I wrote down here was, or typed in was, it results from the communication of information across all its regions and cannot be reduced to something residing in specific areas of the mind. So mind is an emergent property of the body. What does that mean? Well, but it's an emergent property of the body, not just the brain. At least here in this, is it the brain? Did he say? I think it's an emergent property of the body. Yeah. And if you think about it, mind pervades the entire body. So yeah, I know that Alan Wallace has written on this extensively. I just didn't have access to those particular books. We don't have them in our library. So, in collected topics, consciousness is introduced briefly, and then studied at length in the topic called low rig, or mind and awareness. Different ways to translate low rig. So here we're just getting a very brief introduction to consciousness, looking at consciousness in general, mental and sense consciousnesses, and then we go into a little bit of the 7 types of awareness, just so we have something to debate with. It's not really a full-fledged description or exhaustive exhaustive teaching on consciousness by any means. So here in the philosophical studies, awareness, consciousness, and knower are mutually inclusive, aren't they? They're synonymous. And that's talking about the overarching category of consciousness, of anything that's cognizant. And so there are different ways of dividing consciousness. We could talk about main minds and mental factors. We could talk about reliable cognizers and non-reliable cognizers. We could talk about mental consciousness and sense. There are different ways we could divide that pie. But here he's chosen to divide it into mental consciousness and sense consciousness. So consciousness is that which is clear and knowing, or clear and cognizant, is the way Venerable likes to translate that. So clear typically is referring to the non-material nature of the mind. It's the actual nature of the mind. Like in those definitions of the elements, hot and burning. For fire, hot is the nature and burning is the function. So similarly here, clear is the nature of mind and knowing is the function of the mind. It has this capacity to apprehend or to know objects. Okay, so the definition of mental consciousness can't be posited. All right, so it follows that the definition of mental consciousness can be posited. Posit that definition, please.
Consciousness is a knower that is produced by its independence upon its own uncommon, empowering condition, the mental consciousness.
Mental.
Mental sense, no?
Faculty.
Power, mental sense power.
Yeah, mental sense power or mental sense faculty. All right, so it follows that the subject, a knower that is produced independence upon its own uncommon empowering condition, a mental sense faculty, is the definition of mental consciousness. Okay, good. So here we can really look at how 3 things are coming together to produce a new moment of consciousness in that definition. So one of them is mentioned explicitly in this definition. It's uncommon empowering condition, which would be a previous moment of consciousness, not in clear internal form, right? So what we said for the sense faculties was that they're a clear internal form. Would that hold for a mental faculty? It wouldn't, would it? Well, the clear part might. We could say clear and knowing. Consciousness is clear and knowing, but it's not what that word clear means in this context. Okay, so here we're explicitly talking about the uncommon empowering condition, a previous moment of consciousness. And then another of the 3 causes is implied, the object, right? What object will a mental consciousness be engaging? A conceptual appearance of some kind. Hard to get that to roll off the tongue, isn't it? True. Thank you. Good point. Okay, so it will either be, glad you came out of retreat, Venerable. It'll either be a conceptual appearance or and this is a good point. Okay, so let's look at how do the 2 compare, mental consciousness and conceptual consciousness. What do you know about those? How do they compare? 3P. So run us through the 3P, Venerable Lamsel. What's something that's both a mental consciousness and a conceptual consciousness?
A thought about ice cream.
A thought about ice cream is both a mental consciousness. It's a mental consciousness because?
Because it is a knower produced in dependence upon its own uncommon empowering condition and mental sense power.
Great. And it's a conceptual consciousness because?
Because it's mistaken with regard to its appearing object.
It's what?
Mistaken with regard to its appearing object.
According to the Sutra school, that's true. Yeah. We could say that it's mistaken with regard to its appearing object. That's not going to be airtight, though, because there are non-conceptual consciousness that are mistaken with regard to their appearing object, too. So what else could we say about?
Because it's not a direct perceiver.
Still, you'd have the same fault. It's a conceptual consciousness because it is accessing or ascertaining it's apprehending its object through the medium of a conceptual appearance. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So, is there something that is a mental consciousness? It's not a conceptual consciousness.
Yes, a direct visual perceiver of ice cream. Sorry, that's stupid. I'm thinking a yogic direct perceiver of subtle impermanence.
No, actually, your first one was okay. Taste consciousness and tasting, directly perceiving the taste of ice cream. That would work.
You mean a mental consciousness.
Oh, mental consciousness.
That's
yeah,
why.
Right.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Yogic. Yeah, yogic direct perceiver. Yeah. Or we could say a mental direct perceiver or self-knowing direct perceiver. Any of those would work. Mm-hmm. But yogic direct perceiver, realizing subtle impermanence. Good. Mm-hmm. So that's a mental consciousness because?
Because it's a knower producing dependence upon its own uncommon empowering condition and mental sense power.
And it's not a conceptual consciousness because?
Because it knows its object directly.
Yeah. Or you could say because it's a non-conceptual consciousness. Yeah, either one would work. Is there something that is a conceptual consciousness that's not a mental consciousness?
No.
And what's something that's neither?
The ice cream itself.
Ice cream itself. Yeah, good. Or eye consciousness observing the color of ice cream. Okay, good. Thank you for bringing that up, Venerable. Keep me honest. Okay. Then we can also infer the third condition from that description or that definition of mental consciousness, an immediately preceding moment of consciousness. How is it that we know that there's an immediately preceding moment of consciousness? This isn't necessarily in the text, so just guess.
Because of...
Go ahead.
Because an effect must be produced of a similar type as its cause.
Yeah, right. And what did you want to add, Venerable Chini? Use the microphone. Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. An effect has to be preceded by a moment of a similar type. And that's as true for consciousness as it is for anything that's material. Every moment of consciousness is preceded by a preceding moment of consciousness. And as I mentioned earlier, the substantial cause, the thing that actually transforms into the new moment of consciousness, must be of the similar type, like eye consciousness, is the only substantial cause for the first moment of a new moment of eye consciousness is preceding moment of eye consciousness. Ear consciousness doesn't turn into eye consciousness. Mental consciousness doesn't turn into eye consciousness. All six consciousnesses are running simultaneously. It's just that many of them are inattentive. It's interesting that whatever sense consciousness the mental consciousness accompanies, that's the dominant one. Isn't that interesting? So really, whatever we're thinking about, that thinking, that's not always true. Like, for instance, when you're driving down the highway and you get somewhere and you think, how did I get here? I don't remember anything. So in that moment, maybe, or in that instance, maybe you'd say the mental consciousness wasn't accompanying the eye consciousness. But in general, it seems to be that the mental consciousness accompanies a particular consciousness. Okay, so take a new moment of mental consciousness. It is necessarily preceded by a moment of consciousness. Why? Because it's consciousness. It might sound circular, but I think it's a correct reason if you think about it. Every new moment of eye consciousness, take a new moment of mental consciousness. It is necessarily preceded by a moment of consciousness. We can just say that in general because it's consciousness. we'll bring that up later.
So a mental consciousness can be produced by any other consciousness. Like the previous moment could have been an eye consciousness. You saw
Well,
something in it produces.
The immediately preceding condition can be any of the 6 consciousnesses. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay.
But that same eye consciousness could have been producing instead the next moment of an eye consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm thinking is he defines uncommon as meaning unshared. But here, that could be the cause for different consciousness. It could be the cause for a mental consciousness, or it could be the cause for the next moment of an eye consciousness. And thus, I don't see how for the mental, uncommon is really fits in there.
Well, yeah. Mm-hmm. So those 6, I said immediately preceding condition, but actually it's the uncommon empowering condition we're talking about here. So those 6 consciousnesses are the uncommon empowering condition for a mental consciousness, and that's unique to mental consciousness because they are not going to be the uncommon empowering condition for any of the sense consciousnesses because those would be sense faculties, right? So even though an I consciousness could be a cause, it's not the uncommon empowering condition for any other mind other than mental consciousness. That's how I understand it.
But he says, moreover, as the substantial cause of the I consciousness of the present moment, the I consciousness of the last moment is also an empowering condition of the present I consciousness, although not an uncommon empowering condition.
Okay, so you're on page
192 in the somewhere in the middle of that first paragraph.
Moreover, the substantial cause of the I consciousness of the present moment. Okay, so that's the substantial cause of an I consciousness of the present moment would be I consciousness of one moment minus one. Okay, in the previous moment. The I consciousness of the last moment is an empowering condition of the present I consciousness, although not an uncommon empowering condition, right? It's not an uncommon empowering condition. It's an empowering condition, but it's not uncommon.
But his reason for saying it's not uncommon. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not thinking very clearly right now, but I've been trying to puzzle this one over for a few days. He's saying it's not uncommon for the I consciousness.
Right.
But that it is uncommon for our mental consciousness.
The previous moment of an I consciousness is not the uncommon empowering condition for the new moment of I consciousness. It could be the immediately preceding condition.
Which is an empowering condition.
Yes, an empowering condition. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a common empowering condition. It's not an uncommon empowering condition.
But if it's common because it's shared, how can it be uncommon for the other when it's shared with something else? Because he does use unshared as a synonym in here for uncommon when he explains what uncommon means.
Well, this is how I understand it, and I'm not sure I can say it any differently. But the sense consciousness, for the sense consciousnesses, they're uncommon. Each one of them has an uncommon empowering condition, which is its unique sense faculty that's associated with that consciousness. The uncommon empowering condition for mental consciousness is any of the 6, well, yeah, I think you'd say 6 consciousnesses.
Yeah, he does say that.
Yeah. Because they can empower a new moment of mental consciousness. And probably the most common example of that would be at the end of a continuum of sense consciousness, you'd have that brief moment of mental direct perceiver, right? So in that way, you could say that actually that I consciousness is going to continue, even though in the next moment there's a mental consciousness that's going to be the connector for a conception about. I've missed you too. Did that make sense? You still have a doubt?
It's not so much a doubt as it's confusion. Yeah. But I'll look at it some more. My brain is hurting right now.
Okay.
Literally.
Yeah. All right. I don't know if it would help.
They're on the other ends of the nerves.
Let's draw this and see if we can become a little clearer, because this was the section that got us all tied up when we went through it the first time. Let's say we have lots of moments of eye consciousness, apprehending blue. And at the end of that series of moments, there will be that brief moment of mental consciousness that's too brief to ascertain, but clairvoyant people can see it. And that then is like a link to a conception about blue, or whatever we're focused on. So in these series of eye moments, what's the uncommon empowering condition? Eye sense faculty. What's, for that mental consciousness, what is the uncommon empowering condition? Yeah. And what's the uncommon empowering condition for the conception of blue? The mental consciousness. Yeah. I think you can say that. It's going to be, because conception of blue is necessarily a mental consciousness, it's going to be one of the consciousnesses. Okay, so let's read this section and see if we can. On page 192, it says, the uncommon empowering condition of a mental consciousness is the mental sense power, which is any of the 6 consciousnesses in the immediately preceding moment, because they haven't given an example there. They're just talking about in general. So here's the example. Thus, the eye consciousness of the last moment can serve as the mental sense power and the uncommon empowering condition of a mental consciousness of the present moment. Okay, so here's the present moment, this mental consciousness. This preceding moment of eye consciousness serves as, visual consciousness serves as the uncommon empowering condition. Nobody caught me. Okay, so far so good. We have these experiences all the time when the eye prompts the mental consciousness. Moreover, as the substantial cause of the eye consciousness of the present moment, the eye consciousness of the last moment is also an empowering condition. So here's visual consciousness moment 1, consciousness. And then there's eye consciousness, visual consciousness number 2. So what he's saying here is the substantial cause of the eye consciousness, let's say this is the present moment, the eye consciousness of the last moment is also an empowering condition. So what would be the uncommon empowering condition of this present moment of visual consciousness? Visual sense faculty. And, okay, so that's the uncommon empowering condition. He's saying this visual consciousness, of the previous moment, can also be called an empowering condition. It's just not the uncommon empowering condition, because this would be a common empowering condition. Well, it's, what is it common with? In that moment, it's common with the mental consciousness. That's your point, isn't it? It doesn't say it's the common empowering condition. It just says it's an empowering condition. Yeah, so there's common, and then there's there's the empowering condition, and then there's the uncommon empowering condition. Yeah.
Sentence that begins with similarly might help there.
Similarly.
The I sense power is an uncommon empowering condition of an I consciousness, which we came up with there. And if the I consciousness induces a mental consciousness, the I sense power is also an empowering condition of that mental consciousness.
Yes.
Although not an uncommon one, because the mental conscious can be prompted by any of the senses. So we said the mental consciousness uncommon empowering condition was the visual conscious, but he's saying it's the the I sense power.
The I sense power is an empowering condition
of that mental consciousness.
Yes. Not the uncommon empowering condition. It's an empowering condition. It's a cause.
Right.
Although not an uncommon one, because the mental consciousness can be prompted by any of the senses.
Okay. I'm just looking, when I see that as the I sense power, I just, the empowering, the uncommon is where I get confused, common and uncommon.
Well, in the definition of mental consciousness, we do have that word, its own uncommon empowering condition, a mental sense power.
But then it has here, the I sense power is also an empowering condition of the mental consciousness. Can be. Is also. It doesn't say can be, is in.
What does it start with? Which sentence are you on?
Similarly, the same one I just read.
The I sense power is an uncommon empowering condition for the I's consciousness. And if that I consciousness induces a mental consciousness, the I sense power is also an empowering condition of that mental consciousness, because you wouldn't be having that mental consciousness of some form, visual form, if you didn't have a previous moment of I consciousness. So it's an empowering condition, not uncommon, just an empowering condition of that mental consciousness, although not uncommon, because the mental consciousness can be prompted by any of the senses. Only mental consciousnesses are produced independent upon an uncommon empowering condition that is a mental sense power, and this is identified not as subtle matter, but as a former moment of consciousness. So it doesn't directly answer your qualm, but it's an interesting one. So why are we calling any of the 6 consciousnesses an uncommon empowering condition when they're an empowering condition for other consciousnesses, but they're not an uncommon? I think that's how you'd go with it. You'd say, they're an empowering condition because they're a cause, but they're not an uncommon empowering condition. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's probably partly the difficulty with this section is that we don't really know or experience these subtle moments of mental direct perceiver that are on the end of our sense consciousnesses, and that's why we don't really have much connection with them. But this is how it's described. Yeah. Okay. So he's making the point here that any cause or condition can be considered an empowering condition for a new mode of consciousness. However, each consciousness will have a unique or uncommon empowering condition. Okay. So, we've gone through that. All right, so now we're up to sense consciousnesses on page 193. All right, so please posit the definition of a sense consciousness. Here, I just made it easy for you. Who's got that definition?
The definition of a I consciousness?
Of a sense consciousness.
I'm sorry. Is a knower that is produced in dependence on its own uncommon empowering condition, a physical sense power.
Okay, so the subject, a knower that's produced in dependence upon its own uncommon empowering condition, a sense faculty. is the definition of sense consciousness. So that's like just a very generic definition, isn't it? And so then we can build on that for each of the individual sense consciousnesses. So we'll add another piece about that includes the observed object condition. Okay. And so when we divide sense consciousnesses, how many divisions are there? 5. Yeah. So again, visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, tactile. All right. So who's got the definition of visual consciousness on the tip of their tongue without looking at their book? Anybody? Visual consciousness.
Visual consciousness is a knower that is produced in dependence upon its own uncommon empowering condition, a visual sense faculty, and its observed object condition, visual form.
Okay. So I think we can say I sense faculty, but visual consciousness. Yeah. So the subject, a knower that is produced in dependence upon its own uncommon empowering condition, an I sense faculty, and an observed object condition of visual form is the definition of I consciousness. That's a mouthful. But again, it's very helpful, like you were suggesting, Venerable John, but to think about what are each of these pieces. And actually, it boils down to these 3 components of a new moment of consciousness. Okay, so let's look at that. A knower, so consciousness, knower, those are synonymous. Produced independence upon its own uncommon empowering condition, so that's one of the conditions that we needed, the I sense faculty, and an observed object condition, a visible form. And again, it's implicit that there's a previous moment, or an immediately preceding condition as well to become the new moment of consciousness. So all 3 parts are there. Why, this is a little bit of a trick question, but why isn't the observed object condition included in the definition for mental consciousness?
Because there's no directly perceived object.
That's true. There's no observed object condition, but more what I was looking for is mental consciousness focus on permanent objects, don't they? And so how can a permanent object be an observed object condition? It can't be a condition at all. It's not a cause, actually. Isn't that interesting? How can that be? Because the consciousness does seem to be knowing that. So it sure seems like it's a cause, but it's a permanent phenomena. So what would we say? It's like a pseudo cause, or what's the term they use when they talk about permanent things? Acts as a cause. It's not really a cause, but it acts as a cause. Yeah.
But mental consciousness isn't synonymous with conceptual consciousness, and mental consciousness can be direct perceivers that aren't perceiving just permanent phenomena. Because yogic direct perceivers can perceive subtle impermanence.
I love it. That's true.
So,
good job. Good job.
Therefore, they can have an observed object condition.
Okay, so what's an example of an observed object condition for a mental consciousness?
Well, I think that the very confusing, what I found very confusing bit that Venerable was talking about beginning of last week, said that for a yogic direct perceiver, they don't have an observed object condition because they're not actually apprehending the subtle impermanence. They're perceiving something else. They're perceiving emptiness, independent. I don't know. I can't remember what it was. But they're not actually perceiving that. But she said that there is one for a mental direct perceiver. That's not. I don't know. I don't know the answer. But
what is someone perceiving when they're perceiving subtle impermanence? You can only view subtle impermanence in relation to some object, right? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I imagine that you're perceiving those individual moments of some form or some form changing to know subtle impermanence. Okay, so let's research this. I can't think of anything right now, so let me have a look into mine in Tibetan Buddhism and see what it says in there, and we'll come back and talk about this next week. Yeah.
Some of the things a mental direct perceiver would be perceiving such as emptiness or selflessness, are permanent. They're still permanent objects, even though they're being directly seen. So
They're not directly seen, though. Remember, for the Sutra school?
right. And they don't talk about emptiness. Yeah, they talk about
Well,
selflessness, and then
even
and
selflessness
it's
is not directly
implicitly,
seen.
yeah.
Because
That's
they
true.
say the objects for direct perceivers are necessarily impermanent phenomena. The objects known by direct perceivers.
Yeah, that's true. I'm thinking outside of the school.
Yeah.
It says that for a yogic direct perceiver realizing emptiness, there's no observed object condition because the object impermanence does not cast its aspect to that cognizer. It's produced through the force of meditation.
That's right.
Impermanence is the observed object, but not the observed object condition. What that means, I don't really know.
Okay. So there's something about subtle impermanence that makes it such that it cannot cast its aspect. And I wonder if it has to do with the direct perceiver. I mean, the yogic perception. Yogic perceptions are, Sutra School says that you have, only a yogic direct perceiver can realize subtle impermanence. The Consequent School has a different take on that. But the uncommon empowering condition is going to be different. It's going to be a union of calm abiding and special insight focused on subtle impermanence. So I wonder if it has something to do with that. I have a vague memory that it does, but I can't pull it up clearly. So, give me 1 minute. I forgot I brought this down. Let's see if I can quickly put my finger on subtle impermanence. No, I'll have to do some research. So that's a good question that we can look at this week and see if we can come to a clear conclusion about and cut our doubts. Okay? So good. All right, so we've made it up to sense consciousnesses, so I'll leave it to you this week. Maybe on Tuesday we can just go over these definitions so that they become like they just roll off the tip of your tongue. That would be a good thing. And we'll start with non-associated compositional factors next week. How does that sound? Thrilling?
Yes.
Good. All right, so let's... Yeah. Abstract composites on page 193. If you want to read ahead and review those, we can also review those definitions on Tuesday. We can make use of this time if we like. So let's rejoice that we have the opportunity to do study like this, to sharpen our minds and to move our minds and our potential towards understanding emptiness so that we can ascertain true paths and true cessations for the benefit of all beings.